Hi, everybody. I'm Wendy Murdoch, and this is Webinars with Wendy. I am continuing to do my series of webinars, albeit more infrequently, since so many of my guests and myself are really busy. We're kind of back to some pre-COVID levels of travel, which is great to be able to see people in person, but then we don't get to do all these wonderful webinars. This is webinar number 307, and my guest today is Susan Fay. Susan Fay. I don't know why I wanted to give you another name.
Oh, that sounds good though.
Faraday? I know. It's got a nice name. Susan Fay also sounds lovely. And you're going to talk to us about, communing with our horses. So Susan, welcome. Susan. I've been filming for 2 days, okay? Doing Surefoot videos and stuff for the whole rider course. And I'll tell you, after saying the same things over, you get a little tongue-tied, and I think it's just a little leftovers here. But dear Susan, thank you for tolerating my foible there, and just really glad that you're with us today. So thanks for joining me.
Oh, thank you. And it makes me feel really good that we can all be in our natural state, and not everything is perfect. And that's my world. Nothing is perfect, and it's okay.
And that's so true. We get so wrapped up with trying to get it all right and get it all perfect. But I think some of the greatest discoveries have been made through mistakes, right? I remember Absolutely. My biology science, professor telling me how he smashed the microscope down on the glass of the slide he was looking at, and that's how he made a huge discovery. So.
Right.
So Susan, tell us a little bit about you.
Oh my gosh. Well, I like horses. I think that's kind of a given. And what's wonderful about these webinars is we can talk about horses and people love it. So it doesn't matter. If you're a horse person, you love to hear other people talk about horses. So, what can go wrong there? Well, sometimes. But basically, I've been horse crazy my whole life. And I had my first horse when I was 9 years old, and it was a different time back then. I don't think people had a concept of horses are dangerous or could be dangerous, and they get their 9-year-old child a horse and say, "Oh, ride up and down the mountains on your horse. Just let us know which direction you're going." Oh, I'm by myself riding in the mountains. Nothing could go wrong there either, right?
Nothing.
But luckily, my parents were smart enough to get the 30-year-old horse for me to start with. So he'd been through all the kids in the valley before he got to me, and he only had one speed left by the time he got to me, and that was just a walk, a very slow one. So really, it was pretty safe.
You bring up such a good point. First of all, obviously, you grew up in Colorado if you're riding in the mountains. But you bring up such a good point that we had these older horses that we could ride, or that our parents, would find these older horses. And they were safe because they were so experienced. And I think that is such an important point for people to realize, is that, your older horses, they may not be as sound but they're really safe, and they wise. So they're really good for people starting out. It's a great.
Absolutely. And he took care of me. And he has such an original name too. They called him Socks. He had 4 white socks. I'm like, we're kidding.
I love it.
Yeah. So, being horse crazy, and I drove my parents crazy with it. And none of my family was into horses except for me. And my father was a musician. So, do that as a job, not horses. And so, going through school, horses are not an option for a career. All of those messages were given to me. And I kept with the horses, but I went to school with something acceptable, which was environmental science, because, that would be something a normal person would do with their life, right? Right. You are very familiar with, the science thing, and then your parents could say, yes, my daughter does that thing, and it's science, and they can tell everybody what you do. But that horse thing was still always in the background, and everything that I did, I was still riding. I had horses over time, and just kind of progressed that I went, of course, to work in that environmental field, and it was horrible. I hated every minute of it. It was so stressful, and it was so ungratifying. And I got married to a guy and he decided I'm going to medical school in Philadelphia. I'm like, oh no, I didn't know this when I was dating him, only after I said I will. Oops. And then he's like, oh, we're going to Philadelphia and I'll be in medical school. I'm like, whoa, that is not going to be good for me, being an outdoors introvert, rural person now in the big city. And I just took my time in that space to go get a master's in environmental science. And then I was working always with animals on the side. While I was in school, I was working at a humane society, and I was taking dogs into the inner city schools and teaching kids about how to be safe around dogs and just informing them about taking care of pets and that sort of thing. And so I was always in that animal realm, no matter what other thing I was doing that was acceptable, in the real world. Right. So part of the contract when I got married, I told my husband, if I'm going to be in Philadelphia 4 years, then when we get out, we're going to go find a place and we can have horses again and, all that. So we moved to Colorado after he finished school, and he worked as a rural physician. And I had the ranch, and then he says, we should have more horses. And so I got into breeding Morgans because I love Morgans. And so I was doing the ranch thing, and we had cattle and we had horses, and I did the hay, and I learned all of those things that are about being in the land and with nature and all of that stuff. And that's where I think my true learning happened, was on the ranch, in that environment, having to feel things in a different way and not having a lot of technology or distractions or anything like that, just being quiet. And that's where I think a lot of my theories came about as far as what I'm doing now. I was testing them out and I was thinking there's something to this. And being the forever student that I am, I was always during the day going and doing this stuff with the animals, and then at night studying and finding the science to explain what was going on.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I knew you would love this part. And I was forming these theories, and then I was studying, I rode dressage, and Sally Swift was one of your big ones I worked with. I can't remember her last name, is Susan, that she would come out to Colorado and do some Sally Swift.
Okay, it might've been Susan or Sally?
I thought her name was Susan. Maybe. I think she passed away, but at any rate, I would do these different, whatever clinic I could attend, whether it was a Western or English or mostly dressage I was interested in. And I learned natural horsemanship, and I worked one-on-one with a person that had been a Pirelli instructor or one of his first students. And I worked with her for many years. And I learned all those techniques, but I also realized that was not the entire answer to relationships and having horses do things in a nice way, like that you don't have problems with the horse and you can communicate to them in a certain way. And I wasn't getting answers from the horse world and the instructors I was getting about, well, how do you create a relationship, or how do you do these things? And they wouldn't have that. It was all about the physical parts of riding. And I thought, no, there's more to it, because I had some of the physical parts of riding, but I would go show horse and fall apart in this show ring. And my horse would get nervous and it would just be a disaster. And I kept thinking, well, there's more to it. It's not just don't be fearful or don't be afraid of being in front of people or don't get show nerves or all of that. It was something more. And nobody was able to train me how to deal with that situation. And so then I'm back to the looking it up and finding everything I could about sports psychology and all of this stuff, and applying some of those techniques from those disciplines and plugging them in and realizing in the process that things were changing with horses. even though I had good relationships with my horses before, when I started to look at all the brain science and the how do we reach our highest potential and how are we aware of what energy we're creating, when I started to incorporate all of those things into when I was working with the horses, they changed too. And that was really the genesis of a lot of the things that I do now was, oh, I'm taking from science, all of these different places in science and plugging them in and making relationships with my horses and other animals better. Oh, this is great.
This is so interesting because I didn't know a lot about what you did, but we clearly resonate on many levels here, I think, because you have the technical aspects of something and you need to have certain technical skills. But if you're really going to make it into something more, whether that's art, whether that's even science, you need to tap into that more intuitive sense, which is there's science behind it, but it's less tangible. So we don't feel like it's a real thing because it's a sense. And when you, and I don't want to call it our sixth sense, but it's definitely another level of sensing and feeling. And so often and I don't know about you, but in childhood and stuff, like we're told we shouldn't feel those things. They don't exist. You know that, you can't have that conversation with your pet. And even though as kids, so many of us have those conversations with our pets.
Exactly.
Right. And we have to get back to the fact that, yes, there is this other level. And, I've always said, with cell phones, we're just trying to get back to a communication we used to have before, because, when people ask me about telepathy, I'm like, well, what's that thing in your hand and how does it work? Mm-hmm. There's no wires attached, and yet we can talk to people around the world. And so, I think the science will ultimately catch up with the intuitive and not label it as weird anymore.
Yeah. Well, that would be my dream, because part of what I was doing, it seems very magical, or that you can't see what's actually happening. And so people can get afraid of it. They can go, well, that's not real science, but we don't have the technology to measure a lot of what's happening.
Right.
But that's not the only thing we need for scientific validity. We can say, okay, I'm going to create this specific thing inside my body, this feeling, this emotion, all of this. I'm going to change my physiology. And now I'm going to predict what that horse is going to do in response to that. And because it happens and it can be replicated, and I can say, this is specifically what I did, and this is what will happen. I can say it before it actually happens, and people go, well, how did you know it was going to happen? Because it's been replicated thousands of times. I didn't come out here to make a fool of myself, because unless I was sure it was going to work and was going to work with other people when they did it, I wasn't going to say anything. I'm not that brave.
Right. But people are not good observers. So they can't observe and this is what I found, I'm sure you know about Surefoot. The thing that I have to do more than anything is train people to be better observers, to see what's actually going on with the horse. And I'm sure that that's one of the things that you're always coming up against, is because it's on such a subtle level. We have to educate people how to see at that level and feel at that level.
Absolutely. And that's getting back to that thing you talked about, that other sense. And there is actually, we do have that thing called the sixth sense. It's a sixth sense. It's a natural sense, and which would make ESP or those kind of things a seventh sense. But that sixth sense is our ability to sense energetic changes in our environment. And if you think about it, our ancestors had that and used it all the time. To stay safe, to know when the weather was going to change, to, a whole wide variety of things. They would use that information coming in from the environment, all that energy information coming in, and make decisions based on that. But what have we done in our society? We've turned off that because, I don't know if that's scary, or they can't, because we can't see that sense, and it's,
or it conflicts.
Obvious.
And so it's unacceptable because it conflicts with how we're supposed to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
So tell us what you've turned this into, because clearly if you,
yeah. What did I turn it into? It's a night. No, it's a wonderful thing. and it's funny because I thought, oh, I'm going to go to my grave and none of this will get out. But then, it managed to find its way after I wrote a book and, a few years later.
What's the name of your book?
What was that?
What's the name of your book?
My book is called Sacred Spaces, Communion with the Horse Through Science and Spirit. So I'm blending those two together.
Great.
And what I wanted to do, there's so many people that are so brilliant at a lot of the body work. I mean, you included, and knowing all of those intricate parts of how the physical body performs and works and how we can optimize that. But what I kept thinking, and I kind of getting back to that again, I couldn't get answers to how my brain worked and how I could make things happen that I wanted to have happen and have some control over my emotional states rather than having the environment dictate what I thought and felt. That could I actually take control of that and decide how I wanted to feel and react in a certain situation. And as I was studying all of this and gaining more control over emotions and thoughts, it came up that, okay, we can measure all of those with devices. We can measure our brain waves. We can measure our heart waves. We can measure our galvanic skin response, which is our stress response. We can get measurements on all of those. So it's for real. And what if the horses, they can read all of that. They are perfect receivers for all of that information. And so therefore, if I know that the horses can read my energetic body, then I can start to change my energetic body in different ways and see if I can impact the horse in different ways. So that was kind of when I was studying all this. I wonder if I create this in my body, whether I'm thinking a certain thought and I have an emotion and I know what my body feels like when I have that particular thought and that emotion. And now I know I'm creating a specific energy frequency that can be read by the horse. And I might label that with a human term like safety and comfort, but I'm really creating safety and comfort in my own body. And because of that, I'm radiating out an energy into the energetic field around me that says safety, comfort. So anything in that space will feel that energy. If people can feel it, they're not always consciously aware of it, but
right.
Horses definitely can feel it. So knowing all of this, I've got a lot of power essentially in going through the world and affecting others either in a positive way or in a negative way. So knowing what I know now about my energy, I'm going to be very cautious and very aware of what I'm doing at every moment with that energy, especially when I'm around a horse, because I'm going to be communicating certain things through my energy.
That's so interesting to listen to you say that, because when I'm teaching, creating a safe environment is my number one. And it's interesting how just going in with that thought, I watch my whole class settle, right? Mm-hmm. And if there is somebody that isn't feeling safe, I can move in and do things to help them feel safe. But it's the thing that I always go in with, is that's the number one thing.
And if you think about it, isn't that on the hierarchy of needs for horses, safety and comfort is the number one thing. They will choose that over food, over just about anything else you could do. And people always come to me and go, oh, horse, if you're doing safety and comfort, that horse is here, he's going to want to graze. I don't know. Usually they don't. If I can pick what that horse needs and create it in my energy field, he's going to stick with me. He's not going to go look for something else. So part of what I'm teaching is us to become first of all, aware of our energy and what we're creating. And then number two, how do we choose to create a specific energy? And how can we observe our horse and determine, what do I think that horse needs? What might that horse be lacking that I could model for him in my energy field? And then he would feel that and then copy it and train to it. And so this is really, of most of the stuff I do is about me being able to read the horse, first of all, know what is the problem or what he may be struggling with, and then be able to offer a solution, a strategy for dealing with that problem he's experiencing in that moment. But here's the kicker, because a lot of people teach energy about sending it out. I'm going to send the horse love, or I'm going to send the horse safety. Well, there's many problems with that thinking. First of all, do you want to keep that horse needing you? Maybe you do. But if you always send him what he needs, he's never going to generate it on his own. He'll never learn to do it on his own. So my goal is to have that horse learn some strategies for dealing with situations he might encounter. And so that's why I'm a model rather than I'm sending him something. The second part with sending energy is that you can deplete your own energy field.
For sure.
Or you can take on and somebody said, I'm going to heal this horse. I'm going to take on their stuff for them. I'm like, be very cautious about that, because you're introducing an energy into your body that you may or may not want. And I keep the integrity of my energy field. And that's, I think, the easiest way to be safe when you're working in the energy world, that you're not taking any energy on, you're not expending any of yours out to somebody else.
So I'm going to ask you a tough question.
Yes.
Define energy.
Energy for me is, I see it from the scientific lens. So energy to me is all about waves. Energy is waves. So each type of energy that I talk about, for example, safety and comfort, it has a specific energy wave associated with it. So for me, when I think about that in my mind, because I can't get a readout, but I think of it, if I were to have a graph that would show me what that wave looked like, it would be very big and very smooth like this, very regular. And it would just go like that. If I were angry, anxious, the energy wave that my body would emit, if we were to measure it, and you could measure it from your brain or your heart, that wave looks like this, and it's erratic and it's chaotic, and it goes like that. So if you think of energy in that way, it is very tangible, scientific. It is a wave. Okay, so go ahead.
Well, this leads me to so many questions, because I'm sure that you have seen the books where they've looked at snowflakes and they've looked at water drops that are exposed to different energy waves and how they react in their form. Their form actually changes, and this is measurable. They can photograph it and they can see the different, and so it's not weird or strange. It is measurable. And yet the problem with the word is that it's thrown about casually in so many different ways that it tends to lose its value as for what it is.
Right. And really it is a frequency, because the frequency has to do with the height of the wave and the distance between, so frequency is how often or how close those waves are together. That's the frequency. And so yeah, you can use other terms. I like to use frequency because I'm going to create a frequency of safety and comfort, energetic frequency. If you think about a radio stations, they all work at a frequency, right? So you tune in based on the frequency.
Right.
And then that frequency is either the easy listening station or the hard rock station, so it's if we think of it in that same way, safety and comforts is wonderful, nice little easy listening station. And then We might, if we were angry at our horse or frustrated, that would be a different sound altogether, that we're listening to. So I'm always thinking about, what station do I want my horse to listen to? What station does he like? And it may change. So we have to be able to be fluid, energetically fluid, and be able to create different frequencies. And we do that through our thoughts, emotions, and how it feels in our body. And that's how we're.
Have we come up with a way to measure that energy in people in a simple, easy way at this point?
The problem with it is they can a little bit, but it's more theoretical still. I mean, we can measure our heart and our brain waves for sure, right, and our galvanic skin response. All of those shows up as waves. So we can measure that. The problem is during movement, if you've got somebody hooked up to an EEG machine, with all the things on their head, if you have movement, it's going to corrupt your data. So it makes it very difficult at this point in time to actually measure what's happening without that data corruption happening.
Right.
So, and when I first was looking at doing this work, I had gone to some neuroscientists. They're brilliant, and they work all over the world. And their office was in Colorado. So I went to see them and I said, here's what I'm going to do. And here's my theories about it. And they go, oh, that's exactly right. And I said, okay, but you guys know all the leading technology. You guys can tell me, what do I need to do? What equipment do I need to get so that people can see this in real time when they're doing it? And they were like, no, we don't have anything. And don't do it. They said, don't do it. And I thought, don't do it. They said, no, just do what you're doing. And I went away really discouraged. But when I thought about it, I thought how brilliant an answer that was, because our horses are the perfect bioneurofeedback machine.
For sure.
And so that's what they were trying to get across to me. Don't corrupt your work that you do by putting a machine in the middle of it, because the people will be focused on the machine and not on the real thing.
Yeah.
And the real impact that's in front of them. And that's why I'm very low tech on everything I do. I don't use anything, right, essentially, because I want people reading, what is the horse saying? What is the horse saying?
Right. And it's so easy for us to get sort of distracted, if you will, by the technology instead of being present in the moment with what's happening in front of us. And I see that very clearly.
Right. And I think our society has led us to believe that we don't have these abilities, that we could never do it. And when you are quiet and when you are in touch with your body, and you can stand next to a horse, and I'm sure you've done it, where you feel what they feel. You experience their emotions, you experience their pain, because that, an emotion, pain, those are all frequencies being emitted from that body.
Right.
And if you are a receiver, and if you're quiet and you teach yourself, you can learn how to interpret that information.
I've always said, people talk about horse whisperers, and I've always said we need to be horse listeners.
Mm-hmm.
They're talking all the time. We're just not tuning in and listening to what they're saying because we're too busy on our own stuff,
Oh, exactly. And that's why I think it gets back to that point of the technology distracting us, because we think, oh, the answer is in this little device that I'm holding in my hand.
Right.
No, the answer is not there. That's only data. The answer is in the horse and what his reactions are in the real world. How does he respond? That's the information that you want, not about what that device said to you. That doesn't mean anything. What means something to me is, what did that horse do in response?
Right.
And can I replicate that feeling and that idea in my body and recreate it again? So, a lot of people think I'm not very scientific because I don't go to these seminars or when I do a clinic, and I don't use big words. I use words like be and present and That's about, yeah, it's like breathe. I use very simplistic words, but the reason I do is because I don't want people in the part of their brain where they're analyzing and thinking, because that brainwave frequency is very disruptive for horses. It can be like static, listening to static on a radio. It's like makes them crazy, because we're getting so much brain activity that we've got this going on in our head. The wave was coming out, and horses are like, whoa, I'm out of here. So what I want to do when I walk into that space with a horse is to shut that part of my brain down and get into the intuitive part, where the wave is like this. And, you can be doing a lot of activity physical and your brain can still be going like that. Okay, so I'm just one of those that, and probably very much like you, I've been doing the spiritual and the scientific for so long that I no longer can separate the two out. That now I'm scientific or now I'm spiritual, because they're blended together so and integrated so deeply that I can't go, okay, now I'm being scientific or now I'm being spiritual. I can't.
But, it's interesting when you say that, because when you study something far enough, like when you talk to the physicists or you talk to mathematicians, they get to this place of spiritual conversation, because that's where it ultimately leads to. And, it can get pretty deep pretty quickly. But that's where I think you're absolutely right, that there is no separation from it. We make these distinctions. Mm-hmm. And then we can put things in boxes. And I think people like it in boxes because it simplifies it. But the world isn't simple. And when we try to simplify it down to those kinds of things, we miss what's so important. And I think, you were talking earlier about how you had studied some different techniques and you kept recognizing that there was something missing. And it's because they're trying to take a horse and put it into a box that is sort of Arthur Murray step by numbers, learning to dance, but you've lost the piece that's so important. And that's the connection to that individual animal in that moment. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you get these questions all the time. People tell you stories about their horse. What would you do? And I always say, well, it depends, because I'm not where that horse is. It's only a theory at this moment.
Right. And that is the difficult part of getting this kind of stuff out there, is because people go, I want a system and I want a way to know what to do. And it's like, I can't give that to you. I can teach you how to observe the horse, and I can maybe say, okay, I would do this in that case, but I might actually start to do something, and then the horse's response to that thing I was doing was not what I thought it might be, and I need to change to something different. And how would I be able to tell the person, okay, I've got all these different things back here in the toolbox, in the scientific toolbox, but I'm working from the intuition, and I just felt like that tool that I chose is not going to be the appropriate one, and I've got to find another one.
Yes.
And that is not, I don't know how to teach that. I think it gets back to the body of knowledge that we have coming into it. And right now, a lot of people are developing their body of knowledge and their techniques. And then once you get your body of knowledge and techniques, then you can start with the, how do I apply these? Which scenario is this one appropriate in? Which one is this one appropriate in? And that is not something anybody could predict until you're in the moment.
Right.
With the horse. And actually, there's so many environmental factors, when I did a lot of research and you're going, well, we can never account for all the possible variables that might impact this result.
No.
We can only take out a few. But when we're with the horse, you probably are the same way. I'm trying to take in a whole lot of different variables and say, because of all of these things that are interacting right now, this is why I chose to do this thing. And it may make sense.
Yeah, there was a website that talked about intuitive people and how they're actually gathering information. And what happens is people want to focus too hard on one place, whereas somebody with with your experience, you're actually gathering data points from a wide variety of places. And so that goes back to that observation, is that you're scanning a whole variety. And to learn it, it's important to give people fewer variables so that they can start that process. But then it's really responding to what's happening in front of you. And, you know, with Surefoot, the question I get from people all the time is, well, you know, what should I do? And I'm like, you start with this pad in one foot, and then you let the horse show you where you're going, because I can't tell you, I'm not there. Right. But we're so not trained. I think it's kind of it's part of our culture and our teaching system. We're not trained to be critical observers and critical thinkers, to be able to respond spontaneously in an environment, in a situation. And so then we get stuck.
Right. And it was funny, one of my talking points that I had on my little cheat sheet here was that I wanted to say, the Surefoot pads are so wonderfully simplistic and profound at the same time. And this is what seems to escape people, because in our teachings, it seems like we've been taught that the more complex something is, the more valuable it must be.
Yeah.
And actually what I found in the things that I do and how I teach them, and it gets back to that point of making things simplistic, is that a lot of the techniques I have, you might have to remember three things, do this and then do that, and then do this and then observe. So usually we can remember three things pretty easily. Okay. But doesn't mean that those three things didn't take a lot of time for me to figure out at a very complex level. How could I take this complex information and parse it down into three little things that you could do that would get you a whole lot of the way there?
Yeah.
And because
that takes a lot of honing. Absolutely. That people don't necessarily appreciate when you have something that you can explain in that really simple level, just what's gone into the hopper, right, to come out of that. And my Feldenkrais mentor, Mia Siegel, was always like, what's the three things? And there's something magical about the number three.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And isn't that interesting? Because, I think they're working from that intuitive and scientific place. A lot of the really brilliant people were working from both camps, you might say.
Yeah.
They didn't say, oh, I'm just going to be scientific. No, they were gathering information from the field, from other sources. They had intuition. They have all these things. And that, again, is where the major advances in our society have happened, is from those people that could combine the science with the spirit and look at all of the big picture of what's happening. So, for me, it's just exciting and fascinating where everything is going right now, and that people are exploring other things. And
we're starting to bring more of the science that has existed in other fields. In other words, the horse world tends to be rather isolated and traditional. And if it wasn't traditional, then it's not of value. But more and more, we're seeing the understanding of the brain and how the nervous system works. And we're slowly starting to bring that into the horse world so that we can be smarter, better horsewomen and men for the horses, right? I mean, the old guys, that's all they had was to sit there and spend time with the horse.
Right.
But we're understanding it at a whole nother level now. It's fantastic.
Right. And I think that's why, when I got divorced and I thought, okay, I want to go study something, should it be in the horse place or the human? I chose the human because I'm thinking so many things that we can take from that information from it applies to any being, any living being. And we can take that.
So what did you say? I'm really curious what you explored.
Actually, it's so funny. I did general psychology as my PhD, which allowed me to go into a lot of different places, like into epigenetics, into health psychology, into things like how do we do motivate something? How do we have resiliency? I got to look at all of those things, plus some trauma, a lot of the impact of trauma on resiliency and mental health and physical health and all of these things. So I got to go and draw from a lot of different places. And I thought it was really important. I'm fascinated by psychology, but not necessarily when we look at people, it's like, what's wrong with that person? And then put a label on it. I was never into that. So I didn't go into that part of psychology where I was going to counsel people or see what's wrong with you. No, I was more interested is like, how do we thrive? How do we take all of this information out there in all of these different disciplines and put it together to make our lives better? And in this process, those things apply to horses too.
Right. Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. So I know you have some pictures for us.
Oh, yes, I do. Maybe I'll preface this since I'm not good. I'm hoping this will work.
Oh, you'll be fine. Okay. Don't have doubts. It's okay. You can get through this and I can coach you but I think you're under control.
Okay. Well, that's your opinion, but I have other people that beg to differ. Anyway, let me just preface this with some stories and then I'll show you the photos just in case. But so the first couple photos are of a little dog. And this is a really funny story because I went to Warwick Schiller's podcast summit in Texas and did a talk. And in my talk, I was discussing how I learned about this phone call from a horse. One of these techniques that I use for connecting with a horse, and it's called a phone call. And I was talking about the story behind the phone call and what this horse taught me in a very profound way about connecting with horses and what they needed. And I was on the stage and I was kind of a little ad-libbing my presentation because my slideshow, it's a long story. But anyway, I'm up there and at breakfast time, I'd walk past the bananas at the lunch or at the breakfast thing. And I walked past and then I went back because I knew I was going to talk about the phone call. And I thought, no, you wouldn't do that. Not on a stage in front of a bunch of people. And it's like, oh, yes, you will. And I went back and got a banana and I took it on stage. And so as I'm talking about the phone call and making a phone call to the horse, I brought the banana out. And part of the reason why is because sometimes when we have something, somebody talking, you want something that's very non-ordinary to happen, that's going to make an impact so people will remember that thing. And I thought, what better thing than to be very kind of, acting like you're sophisticated and stuff, and then pull out a banana. That's going to have such a profound, startle in the people that they're going to remember that. Okay, so I do the banana phone call, and then I go home and I go to talk to my neighbors. I go to visit them. And so the first picture of it is of how the dog greeted me at the door after I got back. Okay, so that'll be the first photo you see. The next photos are from a recent clinic I did. And this was a case where a horse had a lot of trauma stored in his body. And he's a really big horse, heavy built quarter horse, probably 16 hands or more. And they made him a Western pleasure horse and compressed him into that place of small and whatever you want to describe that as, which was not where if you looked at that horse, that would not be your thing where, oh, that would be a Western pleasure horse. No. So he had a lot of trauma. He was very shut down. And he came to this, I'd worked with her a few times. And at this particular time, I guess he felt he was ready to let it go. And these are the pictures of him during this weekend, or it was actually 2 days. And he laid down in front of, I think we had 6 or 8 people surrounding us. And then what you're going to see is what that healing looked like for him. He laid down there. He went through a lot of ticks and running, and he was down about 20 minutes total, but we were letting him do his own work. I was not interfering. I was merely holding an energetic space of what I call neutral, means I'm just breathing. I'm just there and I'm just present.
Why does this remind me of Stephen Porges' work? Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Just checking. It's like
So, but what's really cool about this is that he chose to be next to all these people. And the very first time I saw him, we put him in the round pound, he lost his mind. And he ran around and he was just, this was a year or so ago. But, and what you're going to see in this is that all of the people and 2 other horses are holding the space. And those 2 horses that are in the picture could have been out eating in green grass up to their knees, but they chose to be in that space. And I also want you to look at how those 2 other horses are standing. They're very square and they're very present. So it's like a person, a horse, a person, a horse. Okay. So we'll keep our fingers crossed that I can share this sufficiently.
oh yeah, you'll be fine.
Okay. And then the wonderful thing, I think the last photo in this is a few days after that clinic, where the horse went out in the field and he came up to her and she was able to get on him and then ride around in the field with nothing. He changed profoundly over that time frame. So here we go. Let's see how it works. Okay. All right. I don't remember how I did this.
You may go to the green button that says share screen.
I did that.
Okay. And then you pick the thumbnail of what you want, which would be your photos.
Well, see, it doesn't show up. There we go. Can you see photos there?
No, you're not screen sharing yet.
Oh, see, this is where it messed up and I did it before.
There you go. You're fine.
Okay. All right. So here we go. This is Fred.
So just double click on it and we'll see it bigger.
This is Fred. This is how Fred greeted me after my banana talk at the Warwick Schiller Summit. I didn't even know they had banana toys for dogs. And nor did I know that he could go on the webinar for free as a dog. So he clearly listened to that. Okay. So now I got to get rid of this one.
No, you can actually probably just hit your right to go to the right and get to the next picture, or you can go to your arrow up there and
let's see. Oh, there he is again. He's so cute. He always greets me every time I go to their house. He greets me with a toy, but I had never seen the banana before. Okay, so here is part of this horse's. I think this was the first day, and I think he just was so ready to let a lot of his emotional stuff go that weekend. And what's really interesting is this horse that's standing over him, she went through a similar type healing maybe the previous year when I was out for a clinic, but now she is able to hold a space for him. And I thought that was so remarkable of what she was able to do there. The little buckskin in the back, that is a new horse that the owner had only had her for a month or so, I think. Okay, so here's during the when he first goes down, and I don't do anything. I don't even know why I'm still holding. I think I was just still holding the Libro, but I let them just do their own work. I don't get involved in anything. And so I think I'm probably talking to people about something irrelevant because I sometimes like to keep people's focus off of the horse, so they're not just staring at the horse and waiting for something to happen.
Right.
And then here he goes all the way down. And what he would do, he was down, I think we figured about 20 minutes. What he would do is go down and have these little ticks. And then he would kind of sit up a little bit or, come up again and just take almost like a breather. Okay, I got to take a breath. And then he would go down again. So I think he did that maybe 4 or 5 times where he would take a little break, come up and then go back.
But clearly not colicky episodes, clearly something else.
No, very much. You can tell the difference between this. It's, you've probably seen the nervous system tics that they'll have and things like that. Sometimes when they're down like this, they will run. It looks like they're running. Yep. The very first time it happened to me, I was terrified because I thought it was colic, and I kept watching. It's like, no, it doesn't seem like it is. And I was watching carefully, but yeah, this one, and you can see where on the dirt, he's run back and forth. You can see how he's changed the dirt in the back there, or the sand in the back there a little bit. And again, let's see, this is one of his little breaks in the process, but you can see these two horses here that are holding the space for him, which is really, really fun. I think that's my last of the photos.
Well done.
So, thank you for getting me through that. I feel so much better. Can you just point out
community around here, right?
But
so how long have you been doing this work like this now?
Well, in secret for many years.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, I've probably done this for 30 years, but it has been something that I've had to keep quiet because not a lot of people in the past were very receptive or open to it. I think COVID changed a lot of things. People.
When did your book come out?
My book was 2019.
Oh, geez, right before the pandemic.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that took a lot of guts. It's like, well, before I leave, I was so frustrated because I would go things and people would not be receptive. And I'm like, I'm giving up. I'm just going to write a book, put it out there. I'll be done. You know, I'll do my cosmic good or whatever, and I'll put the book out there and I'll be done. And then I can go be a hermit or whatever, you know, but that clearly was not in the cards. Yeah. So, yeah, I've been doing it 30 years, but in earnest, because people are coming into more acceptance of this.
Well, I think there's been a shift, and it's been coming, right? I mean, and I hate to say this, but I feel like there's been a very sort of male-dominated, somewhat authoritarian wave of horsemen that came. So I grew up in the 60s and 70s with horses, when we were much more under the military influence, and it was a much more objective approach and recognition of, you know, these are the things that you know, like rider position. There wasn't a discussion about what's good and bad, because this is what was. And then we kind of got into the more style and kind of loss of the military influence and loss of a lot of horsemen and loss of the education, I think, you know. And so we've gone through that wave, and then we had the horsemanship wave, which has helped a lot of people, but there's a lot of things about it that didn't necessarily, you know, if the horse wasn't on the payroll, he wasn't working. Mm-hmm. And yet what I find is that most of us want to have a relationship with our horse. We want to have a connection. And so that wasn't really so allowed, if you will, in that mindset, because it was coming from people that the horse was, their life depended on it, their work depended on it. And so we brought that in, but it still missed the mark. Mm-hmm. Right. And so now what I see is, and for lack of a better word, a much more feminine approach. I talk to a lot of women like you. We're bringing in a much more feminine approach that's about community, because women are so much more about community, and we want that community with our horses. And so your work to me makes so much sense right now. And why is it being sort of, you know, COVID showed us the importance of community. And when we didn't have that community, what happens to the fabric of our culture?
Exactly.
And so, you know, we're recognizing how important community is, you know, and like when I started these webinars, I mean, I just did them because I was trying to figure out Surefoot, right? And I had the time, and I was like, okay, I got a bunch of friends. I know they're home. I'm going to call them all up. We're going to do webinars. But I've had so many people come up and tell me how that got them through COVID because they lost community. And your work is about community so clearly on another level of what people yearn for. Why do we have horses? Because we want that relationship.
Absolutely. And, you know, I talked about that a little bit on my presentation at the summit about, it's been about connection. That was a big word that was used for years, but I don't know that anybody really defined what that meant. And I think that when people got a certain type of connection, that wasn't what they really wanted, because it was just, okay, you got the mind or the body of the horse. But why I used the word communion in my book was because the people that I saw wanted something deeper than that. They wanted the mind, body, and the soul.
Right. Right.
And that's where the work that I do is, let's do all of those, mind, body, and soul.
Right.
And then it's communion. And then you don't need to use dominance.
Right.
Because then you've got a different type of relationship going.
And horses are fascinating because they, mirroring isn't quite right, the word. It's not actual mirroring, but they can fit into all these different sort of ways of being, right? Mm-hmm. They can fit it, as long as rules are consistent, they can adapt to the rules. Yeah. But that doesn't necessarily mean that and you watch the people do the same thing, right? So when you think of a horse that's in a working environment, that person, like just for example, the Amish, the people work so hard. They have an ethic of really hard work, and the horses and the mules and the oxen, they all do. They're like, okay, this is our job, and yeah. they meet in that community of hard work together, right? But now it's the horses. I feel like horses keep evolving to be with us, that people go, oh, isn't it sad? No, I think the horses are constantly finding ways to stay with us. And they've gone from, beasts of burden to war to now friends to therapists. I mean, they really are healing people.
Exactly. And if you think about it, compared to any other animal in the world, horses have been beside us through everything. Yeah. And they've adapted, like just what you're saying, they've adapted to whatever role we needed them in or they wanted to participate in. Yeah. And I think it's just fascinating. And I don't take that for granted for a moment, that they have a lot of spiritual work to do here with us.
Yeah. I think that there's a sort of a unspoken pact between horses and humans that we're here to work it out together.
Yeah. And they're like, somebody said grasshopper, it's like, oh, grasshopper, what should I do? It's like, oh, wise one, I won't tell you. You may get consequences, as if you don't get it. And they're kind of like, well, do I need you to knock you upside the head? Okay, well, okay. That's what you need to get present. Okay. Because I feel like our interpretation of what they're doing is really just a reflection of it's not their problem, it's what we're putting on them, or what is wrong with us. And we don't like to see that. And some of the previous horsemanship that went through, it was all about, what do we do to the horse to make it do what we want? Yeah. And there wasn't any accountability for you about, oh, you could come in there angry, frustrated.
Right.
Well, you could be out of control. You could do anything, but that horse had to deal with you.
Right.
And this is the opposite of that. And it's why I probably don't have a huge number of followers, because I'm going to say, here's what we can do to change ourselves. And it's hard work. And it's not going to be easy. And, but when you come out the other end, you're going to have relationships with not just your own horse, but with every other horse and every animal and every person. And they're all going to be better.
Right. And I always look at the word responsibility as able to respond. We need to be able to respond to the situation, to be responsible. And that just changes my, how you view that in your relationship with anybody, horse, anybody. Yeah. Are you able to respond to them?
Yeah.
Well, Susan, this has been a fascinating discussion. I'm so glad to meet you. I'm definitely going to be contacting you about some other ideas I've got going on. Yeah, I just think that we've been traveling similar paths that haven't crossed until now.
I know.
I'm really excited to talk to you and to get to know you better, even if it's over Zoom. Someday we'll meet in person.
That's right. That's right. But thank you so much, because you're just the epitome of everything, you know, that I hold dear. I was going to say dear. That's not a really good word, but, you know, to go out there and model for everybody, here's the science and here's how I put that in, but then put these other pieces in, and how we make everything better.
Right.
You know,
because we have a common goal, and that's to, as you say, to make everything better. It's not going to be perfect, but we just want to make it better.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
this great. I just love talking to you.
This was great. Thank you so much for having me on.
And thanks everybody for joining in. I feel like we've just had a private conversation, and everybody's come along for the ride with us, and it's been really great. And
oh, good.
Really awesome. Very nice to meet you. You know, someone suggested that I contact you for a webinar, and so I can't remember who that person was, but whoever that was, thank you so much. I really appreciate your suggestion. And please, people, if you want to send me a suggestion for guests, just send me an email at wendy@wendymurdoch.com. And we can't always wrangle them. Sometimes they're hard to get on the show, but we will make an effort to do that. So thank you so much, Susan. Great to meet you. And
great to meet you too. And thanks for what you're doing. It's awesome.
Thanks. All right, everybody. See you next time. Bye.
Bye.